Hi everyone, welcome to the session. In this session, I'll be discussing about accrual and prepayments. This was one of the questions raised by one of my viewers. So, so I thought of discussing this concept, accrual and prepayments. So, what is accrual accounting? First and foremost, we'll discuss about accrual concept. Accrual concept. What does it mean? So accrual concept means you need to match all your expenses. You need to match uh, all the expenses with the revenue or income generated for a particular period. Okay, so particular period means obviously it will be from January to December because we prepare financial statement for 12 months. So therefore, we need to match all our expenses with the revenue generated for this particular period. So period means 12 months period from January to December. Now, when you compare your revenue with your expenses, okay, so you need to consider all the expenses paid and not paid. Okay, so whether it is paid or not paid, the expenses relating to a particular period should be accounted for should be accounted for. So this is the basic idea, the concept of accrual accounting. Okay, so whether the expenses paid or not, okay, the the total expenses incurred for a particular period has to be recorded or accounted for. Okay, now let's take an example to explain this. Let's say there's a factory, the factory rent, there's a factory, the factory rent per month is $1,000. Okay, and the business has paid business has paid the rent from January to October 2020, and remaining the remaining rent, so which means January to October means 10 months. So 10 months rent was paid in cash, and the remaining rent was paid in, let's say, February 2021. Okay, so now what is the total expenses what is the total expenses you should consider for 2020 financial year? Okay, So when you take 2020 from January to December, there are 12 months. However, the business has paid the rent only for 10 months. So which means 2 months rent was not paid. Not paid. So therefore, under accrual accounting, what we should do is we have to take into account 12 months rent, whether the business has paid or not paid, the relevant expenses for 12 months has to be recorded. So in that case, the remaining 2 months, which was not paid, has to be recorded in 2020 financial year as an expense. So you can't record only 10 months rent. Okay. So when you pay the rent, okay, when the business pays the rent, the double entry will be, okay, so where do you debit? You need to debit your rent expenses, and since it was paid, the bank account the bank account has to be credited. Okay, so you debit 1000 times 10 months, so that will be how much? 10,000. Okay, so 1000 is the rent, 10 months rent was paid, so therefore it will be 10,000. So 10,000 was paid. So when you pay, your rent account debit 10,000 and bank account credit 10,000. Okay, so we had to write rent account and here the bank account. Okay, the corresponding credit entry is in the bank account, so therefore we have to mention bank, and here the corresponding debit entry is in rent account, so therefore it is rent. Okay, so now rent expenses we have taken only here 10 months. The remaining 2 months rent expenses has to be accounted for, because under accrual concept, okay, whether the expense has been paid or not paid has to be accounted for. So therefore the remaining 2 months rent has to be debited to the expense account, and we have to create a liability account called accrued rent. So this will be a liability account. That account has to be credited. Okay, so rent here credit and rent expenses debit, accrued rent. Okay, so therefore when you take the rent for 2020, so that will be 12,000. This 12,000 will be transferred to profit and loss account as an expense, 12,000. Okay, so therefore this accrued rent of 2 months which was not paid has to be accounted in 2020 financial year as an expense. We have to debit the rent expenses and we have to credit the accrued rent account. Okay, so this is the meaning of accrued accounting, accrual concept. Whether we have paid, whether the business has paid or not, the particular expenses for that particular period has to be accounted and has to be matched with the revenue earned for that particular 12 months period. Okay, so this is the meaning of accrued accounting. Now let's move on to some of the questions relating to accrued expenses or accrued accounting. A business electricity charges amounts to 12,000 per annum. In the year to 31st December 2020, $9,000 has been paid. The electricity for the final quarter is paid in January 2021. What year-end accrual is required and what is the electricity expense for the year 2020? Show the relevant entries in the ledger accounts. Okay. Now, if you take this example, their financial year ends in 31st December 2020. So, therefore, when you take the financial year, it will start from January to December. So, which is first and 12 months period. Okay. Now, the business uh, electricity charges for the 12 months period is 12,000. The total expenses for this financial period is how much? 12,000. $12,000. But how much has been paid? So the business has paid only $9,000. So which means only $9,000 has been paid. Okay? And this period, the last quarter, okay, the last quarter not paid. Okay, so business has been operating its business throughout the period. Okay, so business has been operating its business, the activities for 12 months period, and whereas the business has paid the rent only for uh, first three quarters, which is 9,000. The last quarter has not been paid. So therefore, when you match your revenue with your expenses to calculate the profit for the financial period 2020, you should match all the expenses, whether it has been paid, whether the expenses has been paid or not. The expenses incurred to generate the revenue for that particular period has to be accounted for. Okay, because business has been in operation for 12 months period to generate the income. So therefore the expenses also has to be accounted for that particular period. If it is 12 months, the 12 months rent has to be, expenses has to be accounted for, the electricity has to be accounted for. So you can't take only the cash payments because the business has been in operation for 12 months. Okay, since you have paid for 10 months electricity, uh, you can't you can't match your revenue with your expenses of 10 months. So you have generated your revenue for 12 months, and whereas you are counting your expenses for 10 months, which is incorrect. So therefore, under accrual concept, accrual accounting, what you need to do is whatever the expenses incurred, whether paid or not paid, the relevant expenses for that particular period has to be recorded. So therefore, if you take the expense account, this is the electricity expenses, electricity, okay, how much has been paid? 9,000 has been paid. So therefore, electricity expenses account debit, the bank account credit 9,000. Okay, so this is electricity and this is the bank. Okay, and not paid for the last quarter. which is how much? $3,000. So $3,000 has to be accounted as an expense, electricity expense, and we need to open an account called accrued electricity. Electricity. This is a liability account. This is a liability account. So liability means it's a payable account. It's a payable account. Okay. In the financial year 2020. Okay. Since we are recording in the year 2020. Okay. So 2020 total electricity expenses, sorry, this 3000 has to be debited here, 3000 has to be credited as accrued electricity. This is the electricity expense account, and this is the accrued electricity, the payable account. So therefore the total expenses will be 12,000. Okay, and this 12,000 will be transferred to the profit and loss account to calculate the profit. Okay, so therefore what year-end accrual is required and what is the electricity expense for the year? So what year-end accrual is required? Accrual is required for 3,000 to show the total 12,000 expenses. Okay, so electricity expense account debit, accrual electricity account should be credited. And what is the electricity expense for the year is 12,000. So electricity expenses for the year is 12,000. Okay, so this is the answer for this particular question, and show the relevant entries in the ledger accounts. So these are the ledger accounts. And one more question I will discuss. This is also relating to uh, accrued expenses. John Business has an accounting year end of 31st December 2019. He rents factory space at a rental cost of 5,000 per quarter, payable in arrears. During the year 31st December 2019, his cash payments of rent have been as follows. 31st March, which is Jan to March, for the quarter to 31st March 2019, 5,000 has been paid. And the second quarter start from April. This is Jan to March. This is April to June has been paid 5,000. Then July to October 5,000 has been paid. The final payment due on 31st December 2019 for the quarter to that date was not paid until 4th January 2020. This is 2020. Okay. So this 2090, this is from October to December has not been paid. Okay. And it was paid in 2020. Okay. So when you prepare financial statement for 2019, that financial period includes January to December. Okay. So we need to consider January to 31st March, April to June, July to October have been paid, whereas October to December has not been paid. So therefore, when you consider 2019, we need to consider this period as well, because the 12 months rent has to be accounted for. When you match with your revenue, 12 months revenue has to be compared with 12 months rent. Okay, so this is as per international accounting standard. Okay, so we need to follow the international accounting standard. Under that, the accrual concept says whether the expenses has been paid or not, the total expenses for that particular period has to be accounted for. So therefore, what is the relevant ledger accounts? So how much is the accrued rent? Accrued rent should be 5,000. uh, Accrued rent should be 5,000. So 15,000, 5,000, 5,000, and 5,000 for 3 quarters paid. 15,000 has been paid. So therefore, when you take the rent account, this is the rent account. Rent account 31st March, 5,000 paid. And this is the bank account. Bank account rent 5,000. Then 29th June, another 5,000 was paid, and the rent, the second quarter, third quarter, 2nd October, 5,000 has been paid, and the rent is 5,000. And the last quarter, 31st December, 5,000 has to be debited, and we need to open an accrued rent account because this has not been paid, this is not paid, so therefore it is accrued, it's a liability, it's a payable amount. Okay, so 5,000 has to be credited as rent. Okay, so this is the ledger entry. So accrued rent credit and rent expenses, this is the rent expense account, it has to be debited. Okay, so this is basically the accrued accounting. Okay, so I'll see you soon with another session to discuss prepayments. So thanks for watching.